Hello and welcome. This is Penny Sansevieri with Author Marketing Experts, and I'm very pleased to have as my guest today, everything. Doctor, literary agent, and Chief Operating Officer of AEI, Ken Achity. Ken and I worked together on a project recently, actually two projects, and I've gotten to know him a little bit and have just really enjoyed the energy and the knowledge that he brings to a campaign. Ken, talk a little bit about your background, because you've produced films and you're also an author and you work on films currently, and you've just got, I don't know when you have time to sleep, but I'm sure you get asked that question a lot.
Well, I'm just basically in love with the story business, and I'm in all aspects of it, from writing stories, developing stories, helping writers develop their stories, getting them published, helping people self-publish, and then getting them made into television and movies. So it's just been a wonderful life. But this is a second career for me, so I'm still enthused about it, even though I'm now 20 years into the second career. I was a professor of literature before that, and what else can I tell you? That's basically it. I love to help writers, and that's kind of my mission.
Well, let me ask you something. I know we can really predefine any kind of questions, and we'll definitely get to your specific content in a second, but there is so much going on with publishing these days, and ebooks, and you know, there was an article, I think it was the New York Times, about Amanda Hocking, who's writing ebooks, and she's, I guess, being offered $1 million publishing deal. And have you ever seen this much change in publishing in such a short period of time?
No, I've been observing change for 20 years, but it certainly has been accelerating with the sophistication of the internet and the coming of iPad and Kindle. Everything is changing constantly, and one thing that I could foresee, I wish I could say I foresaw everything, because then my job would be a lot easier, but one thing I could foresee years ago was that the traditional publishing model was going to have to break down. It's, in a sense, the most insane business model imaginable, where publishers, at great expense, ship out very heavy books to bookstores all over the country, and then allow the bookstores to take those books without paying them anything. It's called the consignment system. They take them on consignment with no risk, and they can then return the books without even having put them on the shelf if they want to. And that return is at the publisher's and therefore at the author's expense. And that system is just crazy. No other business could survive on a system like that, and yet publishing got started that way for some reason and never stopped being that way until recently, when it's catching up with them, and publishers are in trouble because of their relationship with bookstores. I mean, Borders recently went bankrupt and owes millions and millions of dollars to every major publisher in New York. And whether they'll ever collect or not remains to be seen. But this has been, as the crumbling of that system, which still remains strong and alive, but it is crumbling around the edges. That crumbling has led to a power vacuum, which has been taken up by the ebook and by print-on-demand books. And that power vacuum is an opportunity. But it's really never been more opportunity. It's like the Wild West for writers right now. And there are lots of dangerous critters out there to challenge you. Primarily all the books that everybody wants to get out there. That's the biggest challenge, is how do you get separated from all of them. But I've never seen this kind of change on all levels at the same time, other than recently in the music business, which virtually changed overnight with the coming of Napster and basically the almost immediate extinction of the CD. If you told somebody 15 years ago that there'd be no CDs, or almost no CDs, they wouldn't believe you. But it happened almost overnight. The iPod, the internet, simply swept away that old technology, and
changed the entire music business. Yeah. Yeah, it truly did. And I think that that is where that's where we're at. The whole publishing industry, for lack of a better term, is really being Napstered. And talk to me about how do you work with authors? Because I know you have both, big books, but you also work with authors specifically. Talk to me a little bit about that, and then we'll go into the specifics of finding a publisher. Well, I have a new company that started last August called Story Merchant, and basically the way I work with individual authors is as a strategic career coach. And I work with authors at all levels. Well, authors who've done very well, mid-career authors who want to change their careers somehow, authors who've gotten books published but never gotten a movie made, and, of course, beginning authors who don't know what to do and who get confused the more time they spend on the Internet about what the right way to proceed is. So in this new business, basically, it's one-on-one coaching on the phone. You buy a few sessions, and we divide half-hour sessions. You buy them in advance, and then we set them up according to your schedule and convenience and get you on track with what you're trying to accomplish, and then the tactics of how to accomplish it. So it's strategy and tactics. And that's what I've been doing for writers. And this can include representation, but not on the old model where I represent a relatively small book on spec. There isn't enough time in the day anymore to, and advances have fallen so greatly, and from the publishers, and then of course a lot of writers really need to talk to me about getting self-published. I just got off the phone with one who was about to go with a company on the East Coast who told her this and that, and I told her what they didn't tell her, and that, in fact, they weren't offering her anything she couldn't basically do for herself by going on Kindle. And so a lot of my time is, spent with writers who want to self-publish and get started that way, and giving them the various options they have and which ones are best, which ones make the most sense. Well, and I think that is something, you really address something there, in that the literary agent's job, that the agent, that's pretty much all she did. The literary agent's job is really evolving, is it not? It is. I mean, I'm not an agent, by the way. I'm a literary manager, and right. I fiercely defend the distinction because, for one thing, it's a legal issue, but agents do a certain thing, and managers do all of the things that agents do, plus they also produce movies and don't have to follow the same restrictions that agents follow. But basically, whether you're an agent or a manager, if you're not evolving, you're going to be, extinct before long. And every time I go to New York, as tomorrow I'm leaving again, I meet agent friends and manager friends who have evolved their business or who are trying to evolve and looking for advice on what shall I do to keep abreast of it all. Typically, what happens is that an agent, representative of the writers, will have a set of writers within their stable that they simply cannot sell. And those writers come to a point where they think, well, I'm just tired of waiting, so I'm going to publish myself. Thank you very much, and goodbye. And then they keep asking that representative for advice on the self-publishing process. But the truth is that's uncompensated advice, and the model just doesn't work anymore. Several of my clients went ahead and self-published, and I gave them advice, and I realized that my time was being eaten up by giving away this kind of advice. Yeah. So, everybody has to change their model to make it work, and I've now found a way that works. I still spend my time making movies and also helping writers, but in a different way that actually is much better for them because they're more focused when they're paying for the time than they were when they weren't. And they listen to things more and they implement them more, rapidly than they did when they weren't, having to pay for it up front. Yeah. So yeah, it's been interesting, and lots of people have evolved in different ways. Well, talk to me about finding a publisher. I mean, if an author comes to you and says, Ken, listen, I really want to find a publisher, what's the first thing that you tell them? Well,
Facetiously, I would say join the club. And there's 10,000 people in that line just on this block alone. So, but of course, the truth is that that's a very worthy question and a worthy goal is to find a publisher. And one of the first things I have to find out is, what is your book? There are some books that will relatively easily find a publisher. Other books that are not going to find a publisher, and other books that shouldn't find a publisher. That in fact, that the author should publish himself for business reasons as well as other reasons. So I have to start with that question. It's very hard to answer the question in general because every single writer has a different book in a different situation, and I need to analyze that situation. Just to give you an example, if you were, writing about the music business and you were a music instructor, well, there are about 10,000 music instructors literally in the country, and they all have students. So there's a built-in network that could reach hundreds of thousands of people. And you might be better off putting out your, in this case, making it an e-book and doing a select outreach to that group and seeing how that goes. Because if you sold your book to that group, you might be netting 60% of the cover price for every sale you make. Whereas if you sold it through a traditional publisher, you would be fortunate to net 15% of the cover price at the best and 6% at the low end of the spectrum. So it all depends on your situation, and it's not. One of the reasons I think new writers get confused is because they constantly are comparing apples with oranges and don't even realize, which are the apples and which are the oranges, just because there's so much information that goes by. You hear a snatch of information, and you think, oh, that should apply to my book, but you didn't hear the first part of it, which meant that it didn't apply to your book. So there's no supplement for individual, consultation and finding out exactly what your situation is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If an author says, what are some of the secrets to submission? I've heard that, the book has to be clean. Obviously, the books have to be, thoroughly edited. Is there some way to submit a book that will at least get you noticed? Because these publishers are so inundated.
Well, I'm not sure exactly. To get your book noticed, you have to get it in the door first. And just if you just sent a book in without an agent, many of those books are simply discarded. And some companies have the financial ability to just return them unread. And a few companies put them into what's called the slush pile, which is literally a mailroom filled with manuscripts, and young assistants at these companies, or old assistants for that matter, who are trying to move out of being assistants into being editors, are welcome to go to that room anytime they want to and look through manuscripts. And some of the greatest success stories in the business over the last 100 years were discoveries made in the slush pile by a young editor who took the time to go in there and read. Obviously, that's not the ideal way to go into a publisher. But if you're talking about when the book hits the desk of an editor and gets opened, what's going to impress the editor is going to be the ability to know immediately what the book is about, and then to read the first few pages and simply be unable to stop reading, meaning that things like grammar and punctuation and style are so good to begin with and so perfect that the editor doesn't even stop to think about continuing for that reason. But what's being said on the page is so powerful that the editor just can't wait to turn the page. That's obviously the ideal situation. So I was talking to someone a couple hours ago on the phone, and she's convinced her book is great and wants to put it out herself. And I asked her, who's been reading your book and all of that. And she basically says that her friends and family have been reading it, and that's all she knows. It's great. Well, okay, that's fine, but it isn't going to pass muster in New York. To say all my friends telling me my book is great has very little relationship to the reality of, pressure in the New York publishing world or any publisher's world, where literally thousands of manuscripts come in every year.
Yeah.
They've got to stand out with excellence and everything else before they get a chance to get through the filter.
And I know that you talk to authors both about publishing and self-publishing, and do you have a preference? Do you think that an author, with all the manuscripts that are being submitted and all of the competition that there is, because I had an author, in fact, last week say to me, he said, well, if I have to do all my own marketing, and if the advances have shrunk, and if, it just went on and on and on, he goes, why would I even go to a publisher? Do you get that question a lot?
I get that question 5 times a day, and on top of everything else that you just said, the other issue is that if I give it to a publisher, which has been my dream, I lose all control of it virtually, for the duration of the contract, which is going to be as long as the publisher keeps the book in print. Something that's not the easiest thing to ascertain, by the way. Whereas if I keep the book myself, I'll keep control of the book, publish it myself, then I could keep control of it, period. And I don't have to consult with anybody. A lot of self-published authors, however, are so unprofessional that they don't serve themselves well by self-publishing because they aren't using any expert guidance to make sure their book reads well, is good, has a great cover, has the right stuff on the back cover, the right stuff on the front cover, and has a chance of getting noticed. So if you're going to be self-published, it's like starting your own shopping mall. You don't do that by just going down to the corner and start digging. You have to lay the foundation, buy the land, make design. A lot of work to be done to go in self-publishing and do it right. And the irony today is that people who you were just mentioning at the beginning of the call, that somebody is discovered on the internet, she sells 100,000 copies of her ebook, and suddenly the publishers are trying to acquire her and to put her out, as a regular author in a regular, like, traditional publishing situation. And on the other end of the spectrum, writers like Stephen King and Jim Patterson are either already doing this or exploring just going straight into ebook themselves and bypassing the publishers. Isn't that interesting? It shows you that the internet is, in fact, a massive fulcrum. It's like a lever that is you can use for leverage on your behalf. There are some arguments for going with traditional publishers. Don't get me wrong; it's still a vital part of our business, but they primarily have to do with the intangible thing called prestige.
Yeah.
If Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen had published Chicken Soup for the Soul today instead of back when they did, and they'd done it by ebook and had the same kind of marketing apparatus that they later developed, they would have made even more than the hundreds of millions that they made by putting them out themselves. And now that they are who they are, they can go that direction and don't have to go through a publisher. But that means they've got to be a business, and they can't, they have to have their own marketing department. They have to have their own art department. They have to have their own promotion and publicity. And that's the big advantage of a publisher, is that they have all of those things already in place. And if you play your cards right, you can get them to do it for your book, as we recently saw with the Kennedy Detail, which was, I think, brilliantly published by Gallery and promoted and hit the New York Times bestseller list. It's a lot easier for a publisher to hit that list than it is for an individual author. But anything is possible in today's world.
Well, absolutely. Anything is possible. We saw that, a couple of years ago with The Shack that was self-published and hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I have many friends, many good friends in New York publishing, in houses, agents, whatever. And sometimes I feel a little guilty that I'm telling authors, look, you need to retain as much control over this experience. But if you do, as you pointed out, it is a business. It has to be treated as a business. You have to vet the project. You have to get, do what you can to make the book as good as you can, because your book is your resume. Where do you think? Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
No, it absolutely is your resume, and I see people self-publish all the time. In fact, I have a couple of them on my desk right now, where it simply doesn't look like a book. And it means that the author had their own image of a book in their mind instead of going down to the bookstore with the tape measure and taking a look at what a book, looks like and measuring that and figuring out this is the book, primarily, preferably buying the book and bringing it home and using it as a model for their book. If it doesn't look like a book, out there to whoever they give it to, the audiences they speak to, et cetera, they all subliminally, if not consciously, see it's not like a normal book.
Right.
And that makes you think, well, maybe this isn't like a normal consultant or whatever the author is. Mm-hmm. So your book has got to look as good as the best book out there. And if not better. If it looks better, then you've got a real shot at getting people's attention. Simple things like the size of the title on the book cover is something that is really a science, because it's got to be of the size that when you reduce it down to a thumbnail, as it sometimes is on the online sellers, it's got to be very striking and still clear. And when you have it as something to see from across the room in a bookstore, it's got to stand out. So the colors of the cover are very important, as well as the size of the type, and all of those details are part of the art and business of selling books.
Yeah, and it really is an art. When you look at cover design is an art, and a lot of times I find, and I don't know if this is true for you, authors will try to cut corners on things like editing and cover design, which are probably the two biggest areas that they shouldn't cut corners on. If an author's coming to you today and says, okay, I want to self-publish, do you recommend that they go through a self-publishing house like an author house or a Wheatmark or something like that, or do you recommend, or CreateSpace, or do you recommend, if they can, that they become their own publisher?
Well, if you go through CreateSpace, for example, you really are your own publisher. But what I recommend in an ideal world is that they have a real editor edit the book for them, meaning somebody who's got experience with commercial success, as opposed to having a machine do the editing, which, virtually you can do yourself on your word processor to begin with.
Exactly.
And yes, many services offer in-house editing, but they're not the same kind of level mostly as you would get if you went to a commercially successful editing company. Mm-hmm. And, one that's had bestsellers and knows that when it sends a book out, it's going to be read by everyone without any negative attention to its writing or its style of grammar and mechanics, et cetera. I would say that your ideal situation is to have people read your manuscript or your book with rose-colored glasses. So that's the best case. The medium case is at least clear glasses. And the worst case is brown glasses, which is what people start using. Yes.
Largest marketing company that specializes in working.
And if we've got some, let me mute
serious cost
folks.
Oh, okay.
Sounds like we have some interruption. Okay. I'm sorry, Ken. Go ahead.
Worst case, dark colored glasses that are caused by a misplaced comma or, too many exclamation points on page one, or incorrect making of dashes, or any of the other things that show that the writer or the editors were inexperienced and unprofessional. Readers who read a lot of books, which is your target, instantly see these things. And
yeah.
It turns them off. Sometimes they're so turned off they close the book. Other times they are annoyed, they keep reading, but it becomes a cumulative situation. Until finally they go, there's something wrong with this thing. You get distracted from what you should be doing,
right?
Which is being involved in the story or in the information. Instead, you're involved in the conveyance, which is not professionally and properly put together.
Right, exactly. And let's talk for a second about distribution. So companies, and I've dealt with CreateSpace before, and I like them, and I've dealt with a lot of the other self-publishing companies, but distribution, is that a big challenge for authors right now as far as getting their book into a system, or does that not really matter?
Getting into a system, like, you mean getting it
into Barnes & Noble or something like that.
Well, again, it's a very complicated question, because getting it onto BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com, it just couldn't be easier in today's world. I mean, there's certain technical things you have to do, but everyone has the access to do that. To get the physical book into the physical bookstore, of course, that is the biggest challenge in book business. I mean, the publishers themselves will tell you that. They have the same problem. You know, I had an author have a book come out last year, and he was very upset that the publishers only ordered 5,000 advance copies of his book, but the bookstores only ordered 5,000 copies from the publisher, and the publisher has no control over that. The publisher tried to sell it to the booksellers, did it at sales conferences, did it with mailers, did it with all the ways that publishers know how to do it, and believe me, they do know how to do it. And the response was simply not enough enthusiasm to order more than 5,000 advance copies.
Yeah.
When a book starts doing well, they'll reorder, but you can't. The market speaks for itself. I am always telling people that people say, what do you think the chances are of this doing that? And I answer, the market speaks for itself. For somebody to say, here's what the chances are, they would be the richest people in the world to say that, because that would mean they could predict things like that accurately. And there have been article after article of very good books published by very good publishers and doing absolutely no business at all, and much less than very good books published. And James Redfern's Celestine Prophecy, he couldn't get a single publisher to pay attention to it, but he published it himself and sold 500,000 copies somehow.
Right.
And then Warner Books bought it for a fortune. And it went on to do well, despite the fact that it wasn't the most brilliantly written book in the universe. And it just, he got lucky. It hit a vein at the right moment. These things are intangibles. And I like to say that, you are your own best investment. And if you believe in yourself, your energy should be focused on making your own communication happen. And if you hand it over to a publisher, let's make sure that there's true enthusiasm there, and that there's a true publishing plan, and that you can feel that you're passing the baton to somebody who can run faster than you could. Otherwise, keep hold of it yourself, and you have a better shot at winning your race,
Yeah, exactly. What do you think the number one thing, if there is one thing, that authors going it on their own really need to know, aside from, we talked about the importance of the book cover, we talked about the importance of editing. Do authors really need to be aware of what's selling and what's not? As far as there was a time, for example, when there was a lot of chick lit that was being pushed, the Bridget Jones Diary, the surge of all of those books. With so much going to the audience, the audience is really determining what's selling and what's not, as opposed to the publishers. The authors still need to be aware of trends and things like that?
Well, they don't have to be aware, but the more awareness, the better. I'm going to go try to sell real estate. If I'm not aware that, houses on this block are not selling, maybe I'll still sell a house. Maybe I'll even be better off, than people who know that these houses aren't selling.
Yeah.
In the long run, awareness is more important than anything else. I mean, awareness is more important than luck in the long run. So the more you can educate yourself about the business that you're trying to be in, the better off you are. Do you have to educate yourself? Do you have to know the latest this, the latest that? No, of course not. The human race is filled with exceptions, and some of the greatest success stories are exceptions to the rule.
Right.
But while you're waiting to get lucky, what I think you should be doing is learning everything you can learn and getting all the help you can get and investing in yourself. That's the best investment you can make because it's the only one you can control.
Well, that's very true. And I think educating yourself about your industry as well as the publishing industry, because the publishing industry is complicated, and for a lot of people who are just coming into it, frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know about you, but over the years I've had so many people ask me, how does anybody make any money in this industry? And it is a funny, it's an industry based on this old book returns model, right? Where returns can come sort of screaming back into a warehouse if a book doesn't sell well. What are some ways that authors can stay in tune with the industry?
Well, they can subscribe to Publishers Marketplace, which is the daily newsletter that I look at, that tells you all the latest trends, all the latest situations with the bookstores, with the editors, what books are being bought and sold, and it reports on the state of, things like authors' royalties on the ebooks, the Authors Guild versus the publishers, and all that stuff is in publishersmarketplace.com, and there are other newsletters throughout the internet that are available. And, of course, Publishers Weekly is a magazine that you can buy in a bookstore or subscribe to, and gives you a weekly overview of the publishing business. And it's good to educate yourself this way. If you're a romance writer or aspiring romance author, then get hold of Romantic Times magazine and subscribe to that. And before you know it, you'll start knowing what's really going on in the business. Is too much knowledge a dangerous thing? In the long run, I don't think so. I think it's more dangerous to not know what you're talking about. And I can't tell you how many times I see new clients who come in and with what they call a romance novel that doesn't follow any of the rules of romance novels and doesn't really fit on any bookshelf because it crosses, the genres. I published a book a few years ago called How to Publish Your Novel that goes through and talks about the different kinds of novels and what each one requires and who publishes that kind of novel. And you'd be surprised how many people don't even think about that when they start writing. They just think, I'm just going to write whatever I want to write. But then that's fine. It may be wonderful, but if it doesn't fit into the market, then what was your purpose in writing? And if your purpose was self-gratification, then there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. You had your good time and enjoyed it. But if your purpose is communicating, and not to mention selling, then you need to know who you're selling to and what they're buying.
Right.
Anybody who sells vacuum cleaners door to door knows that. You don't sell things that won't sell door to door.
Well, it's interesting, Ken, because this is the one industry where I've referred to this oftentimes as people sort of think it's the field of dreams just because they wrote it. They think that readers are just going to beat a path to their door, and so they sidestep all the business stuff that they should do. The research, the market research, getting to know your industry, who else is in your space, and actually networking with them. I mean, it really is no different than, opening a bricks and mortar store in the sense that you have to treat it the same. You have to treat it with the same way as well as the same risks because the investment can be significant. I mean, would you agree?
Oh yeah, exactly. And you need to make sure that that you really checked out everything that you're doing. That's what's so wonderful about Google. It doesn't take you a second to check things out. I mean, I find myself doing it while I'm talking to somebody on the phone. Mm-hmm. And you can find out immediately who's real, who's not real. Find a chat room that talks about whether this company or that company is good for you. There's just kind of no excuse for not knowing what's going on in today's world because we've got this massive machinery at our fingertips, the internet, which is the external brain of the human race. Yeah. That gives us all access to the the huge treasury of knowledge that humans have created over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there really is no excuse anymore. What, on average, do you recommend an author spend to get their book to market? Is there an average that you try to work with?
No, I think that is entirely a function of the author's resources. In other words, if you happen to be a multimillionaire, you can't spend too much on getting your book out there.
Right.
And if you're not a multimillionaire, well, we have to figure out what can you afford, but what can you aspire to? Because the question of affordability is, one of those crazy flim-flam questions. Nobody can afford anything if you want to argue it, or everybody can afford everything if you want to argue about the infinite bounty of life. But if you're a normal person doing a normal book, it seems to me you should be spending at least somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 trying to promote your book when it's being launched for the first 3 to 4 months. I mean, if you don't do that, then you're just basically tossing that pebble in the pond and hoping that something huge happens from it. And then that's kind of a typical budget for the typical person. But if you are wealthy, don't hold back. I mean, don't go crazy either and throw away money for no reason. But on the other hand, that's what money is for. Money does make things happen. One of the reasons we all love money.
Yeah,
Makes
exactly.
things happen. It's the blood of the creative process.
It does make things happen, and I think that if you're going to do it, and I've seen projects just literally a step or two away from being phenomenal books, and the author, cut the, decided to cut the budget and maybe cut some on the cover or had a non-designer design the cover. Talk to me a little bit about cover research, because that is more times than not where the author gets hung up.
Cover research?
Yeah, doing book cover research. How important is that, or should they just turn everything over to a book designer?
Well, honestly, I think that the latter is the right answer. I mean, I know a great cover artist or two who have worked with the major publishers and who've had, been forged in the 20-year furnace of the highest competition in the world, which is publishing in New York. And you can, for a reasonable amount of money, get a cover made by them that will look every bit as good as any cover that you've ever seen from a New York publisher. Why would you, unless you just have time to kill, why would you risk your own, lack of knowledge? I mean, I myself, if I'm about to do a new book, would rather go get one of those guys to make me a cover than to try to do research and figure out, what I should put on my cover. And that's one of the things that troubles me about the online services, of which there are many. They'll make a cover for you, and they basically give you visual choices, and you click a button for the one you like the best. And at the end of the day, if it looks like a puppy dog instead of a stallion, they're not going to tell you that. There's no internal mechanism that will let them tell you that. It's just a machine. And meanwhile, you're going to think it's wonderful, and somebody finally tells you it looks like a puppy dog, and you don't know what they're talking about because in your mind it's a stallion.
Right.
These guys know that already. Like a typical mistake that writers make, and I go through this with my consulting clients, they say, here's my ideas to tell the artist. And I always say, let's let the artist come up with, a cover first, and then you can talk to him about your ideas. But almost every time that the author's ideas create the cover is too busy, has too much going on, its focus is unclear. In other words, they try to tell the whole story of the book, on the cover. And authors complain, well, I don't think that guy who did my cover even read my book. Well, let's hope not.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. That's not, why would you want to confuse him with the details? What he should have is a very clear picture of the meaning of your story. And if you don't have that, and if that isn't on the back cover of your book, then your story's not going to sell anyway. So that's what you want him to have. And then he'll page through it, pick up the spirit of it, and come up with something. It's exciting to see what cover artists do. And it's really dismal to see what authors self-publishing come up with for their covers, because they just follow,
Right. Well, and the other thing, you bring up a really, really great point, is that you don't really want your book cover designer to read your book, because the person walking into a bookstore or looking on Amazon or whatever hasn't read your book either. So,
right.
They have to design for the eye that is just going to give you about, 10 seconds.
Yeah. Just like if a real estate agent came to sell your house, and obviously you've dolled it up for the moment when they see it for the first time. Do you really want them to go through your house with a microscope and a fine-tooth comb and open every closet and look in the basement and look underneath every rafter? And no, you really don't want them to do that.
No.
You want them to have a good general impression.
Yeah.
So that's all you're going to have 1 second of the reader's time as he's walking through a bookstore or cruising through the internet. And if that cover doesn't grab the reader in that 1 second, then all the reading of your book in the world, is wasted anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You'll never get read by the stranger.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, I just, for the listeners on the call, and I want to open it up in just another minute and see if we have any questions, but, you should never cut your own hair. You should never design your own website. You should never design your own book cover. I mean, and there's so much software out there now where authors can do their own book cover design. And I will tell you that I can pick out a self-designed book cover out of a room, and I'm sure, Ken, you can as well. Out of a room of 500 covers, you can go right to the ones that were self-designed.
Yeah, including a book that's self-designed. I mean, you just open the book and you immediately see it's self-designed because the paper is the wrong color.
Right.
Bright white paper is not what normal books are published on. Mm-hmm. But every author seems to love white, paper because they haven't even bothered to compare it to the books in the bookstore.
Exactly.
Don't do that.
And, somebody once told me, it's great to love your book. I mean, we're just, you've got to be the first one to love it, because if you've got to have the passion to carry it. But don't fall in love with your book to the point that you think that everything about it is perfect. You have to be able to have some objectivity, a little bit of distance, and put it in the hands of people that you trust. Find yourself a team. And some of this stuff, Ken, and I'm sure you've seen it too. I had an author about 4 weeks ago email me and for a call, and I said, so what's the title of your book? And he said, well, it's too long for me to tell you. And I said, well, that's not a really good way to start. And he said, well, it's 28 words. 28 words. I mean, I tell people this story, and they're just like, oh, my God, 28 words in the title of this book. And
that's very funny.
That's
the worst I've ever heard.
And this is a publisher who is a self-publishing company that we did not mention, but who shall remain nameless, who literally just let this guy kind of, run amok. And so it's it's a really bad note to see what some of the stuff that happens out there. So I want to just unmute this and see if there are any questions. All right, guys, you're unmuted. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions? No questions? So, Ken, let me ask you just for a few final tips then on finding a publisher. What did we not address that you were hoping I was going to ask? Because God knows I'm not the perfect host either, so.
Well, I mean, the obvious place to start is the internet.
Right.
And you start with publishers who publish books like the one that you're trying to publish.
Right.
And I think that always, is the obvious thing to do. There are all kinds of books like the Writer's Digest that show you all the publishers that are out there and what they're looking for. So, and they're even cross-indexed at the end. So if you wrote a fishing book, you can go to the back of the Writer's Digest and look under fishing, and you'll see which publishers handle fishing. So I think the first thing to do is to use your head to look for the resources that are right around you, and there are just enormous resources.
Well, I want to thank you, Ken, so much for being on the call. Can you give out your contact information so if somebody wants to reach you to engage your services, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, my website is storymerchant.com, And so they can reach me at drk@storymerchant.com.
And the website address, again, is storymerchant.com. There's a ton of information on there. And by the way, you've got a great blog. And I highly recommend it. Like I said, I've worked with Ken on several books and just has done just a phenomenal job and a wealth of information and has a ton of success stories. So definitely get in touch with him. Ken, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you. And one other thing people can do is they can write inspire@storymerchant.com and receive a daily inspirational newsletter with a quote from a writer that'll keep you going, and also news of what's going on in the world of writing in terms of contests and deadlines and awards and conferences, and also what's going on with the clients in our several company. So I wish everybody the very best. And Penny, I really appreciate your having me on. And anytime I can answer a question for anybody, in your group, let me know.
We will definitely do that. And again, it's drk@storymerchant.com or inspire@storymerchant.com. And it's a great newsletter. Ken, thank you so much for being on the call.
Thank you, Penny. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.